Tonight, I'll tell you 5 stories, all real. It's all pulled from the forgotten edges of ancient history that may leave you wondering how much of the past was quietly buried. On purpose. We'll begin with a chilling ritual practiced from Japan to the Balkans, where people were buried alive beneath temples and bridges, still breathing to satisfy the gods and keep buildings from collapsing. Then we'll journey into the grotesque banquet halls of ancient kings, where emperors ate so much they literally burst, nobles purged between courses, and the line between dinner and sacrifice was disturbingly thin. Next, deep beneath the dust of Mesopotamian ruins, archaeologists found strange clay tablets, not for reading, but for binding. These were demon traps, spells written to curse, haunt, or banish spirits, many still untranslated to this day. Then we'll cross into the remote deserts of western China, where archaeologists uncovered a burial site that shouldn't exist. Thousands of years old, yet eerily preserved. Blonde hair, European features, and no clear explanation. These are the mummies of the Tarim Basin. Lifelike, haunting, and utterly out of place. And finally, we'll drift to the island of Delos, a place so sacred that death itself was banned. No births, no graves, no crying infants. Just stone, silence, and rituals so extreme they turned the island into something colder than a graveyard, a land where no one truly lived, and no one was allowed to die. 5 forgotten stories. One eerie journey into the shadows of the ancient world. So settle in, let the noise of the day fade, and follow me. Into the past. Chapter 1. Buried alive for the gods. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a riverbank at dawn. The mist hangs heavy. In the distance, workers carry stones, not for battle, but for building. A bridge is being raised across the water, a great work of engineering for a rising kingdom. But just before the first stone is placed, a silence falls. The priest steps forward, and beside him, a child. She's maybe 6 years old, wrapped in ceremonial cloth, eyes wide, silent. She doesn't cry. She's been told this is an honor. And as the first stone is lowered, she is gently placed beneath it. Still alive. This is not a myth. It is a forgotten ritual called foundation sacrifice, and for thousands of years, it was considered necessary, holy, and horrifying. Across the world, in Japan, in the Balkans, in Mesopotamia, and beyond, civilizations believed that buildings had souls. But like all souls, they needed to be fed. And to keep a temple standing or a bridge from collapsing, the gods demanded a price. A human life sealed within the walls. In ancient Japan, the practice had a name, Hitobashira, which means human pillar. Chronicles tell of castles that could not stand, walls crumbled, towers tilted until a human was buried within the foundation. One story from the 1600s describes a woman named Oshizu. She was promised wealth for her family if she agreed to the ritual. And so, she was buried alive beneath a pillar of Marioka Castle, her body hidden within the stone. But when her son died in poverty, the promise broken, it said her spirit rose in anger. Each spring, the moat would flood her tears, rising from the foundation she was sealed in. That's how many of these legends end, not just with sacrifice, but with haunting. Further west, in Eastern Europe, similar stories echo through folk songs and oral myths. The most famous is the tale of the Bridge of Arda in present-day Greece. According to the legend, a master builder attempted to construct a massive stone bridge, but each day the work collapsed overnight. Then, one night, a spirit, some say it was Death himself, visited the builder in a dream and whispered a solution. The bridge must be sealed with the life of someone he loved, his wife. And so, the next day, she was tricked into standing at the foundation. When the stones were lowered, she was entombed, and the bridge finally stood. The chilling part? Archaeological digs in Eastern Europe have uncovered human remains buried beneath bridge pilings. In some cases, they're bound, curled into fetal positions. Some even show signs of trauma or fear. But this wasn't always viewed as cruelty. In these cultures, it was seen as a divine pact. A person offered, especially if chosen with honor, was believed to live on as a guardian spirit, protecting the structure they died for. Their life force became part of the architecture, a wall, a tower, a gate, all resting on human bones. Sometimes they weren't volunteers. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia, enslaved people or prisoners were entombed beneath ziggurats and palaces. Archaeologists have found tomb-like chambers under ancient buildings that contain not a single coffin, just a skeleton laid in the dirt, without offerings or honor, not buried, but placed, sealed. But the most disturbing version comes not from myth or excavation, but from the sound of silence. There are records from both East and West of people claiming they could hear whispers coming from beneath certain temples or shrines, not loud, just murmurs. In Japan, some said that certain castle walls would cry on moonless nights. In Romania, travelers once claimed the stones of ancient gates breathed when the wind hit them right. These weren't just superstitions, they were whispered warnings. Because a sacrifice was not a murder, it was a binding. And a bound soul never really rests. Foundation sacrifice eventually faded as the world changed. New religions took hold, and with them new values. But traces remain. Ritual cornerstones are still laid with great ceremony. Time capsules, coins, even sacred texts are buried beneath buildings. We do it to mark the beginning of something. But once we did it to demand protection from forces we feared. Even today, when archaeologists stumble on bones in the base of ancient buildings, it's not always clear. Were they simply buried nearby? Or were they chosen, sealed, offered? We may never know. So next time you cross a very old bridge or stand inside a crumbling stone gate, remember, that structure may be older than memory, but someone, somewhere, may still be part of it. Watching, listening, a silent guardian, or a restless one. Chapter 2. The Kings Who Ate Themselves to Death. Picture a banquet that never ends. Torches burn low along marble walls, casting strange shadows across rows of golden platters. The smell of roasting meats, honeyed wine, and spices fills the air until it becomes suffocating. Harps play softly, and dancers sway between tables, but no one is watching them. The king is feasting, and he has been feasting, for hours. To outsiders, it may look like a celebration, but what you're seeing is far darker. A ritual of power, indulgence, and sometimes death. Throughout history, kings have eaten not just to nourish, but to dominate. Ancient banquets weren't simply meals, they were displays of excess. Carefully curated performances where appetite became a weapon, and where the line between celebration and horror often vanished. Take, for example, King Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, ruler of the mighty Persian Empire in the 6th century BCE. Ancient sources claim that Cambyses, driven by delusion and obsession, held feasts so grand they left his court stunned. He would gorge on rare meats and exotic fruits until he fell unconscious, only to wake and demand more. His downfall? Some say it was rotten food, a slow poisoning hidden in his endless meals. Others suggest he simply ate himself into madness, slipping into hallucinations from fermented drink and diseased meats. One Greek chronicler simply wrote, "He was not mad by nature, but the food and wine made him so." In ancient Rome, the banquet became something even more grotesque. These were not quiet dinners, they were epic spectacles, often lasting days. Senators and nobles reclined on silk cushions as slave boys served courses in dozens, sometimes over 100. The Roman elite didn't just eat, they purged between courses, deliberately vomiting to make room for more. Hidden behind the dining chambers were vomitoria, places not of legend but of brutal practicality, where guests could empty their stomachs and return to feast again. Some historians argue vomitoria were architectural features, exits for large crowds in coliseums. But others suggest a darker possibility, that these spaces were repurposed. Secret rooms, where elite guests would rid themselves of excess food in private shame before returning to their gluttony with clean palates. Then there's the tale of Lucullus, a Roman general so obsessed with lavish banquets that he famously dined alone in splendor when no guests were present. He once demanded that seafood be caught from the Red Sea and brought to him in ice, thousands of miles away, just for a single supper. His feasts became legendary, not just for their cost, but for their symbolism. Because in Rome, food wasn't about hunger, it was about hierarchy, about showing the gods and your rivals that you could consume the world and still ask for more. But perhaps the most disturbing stories come not from what was eaten, but from who. In some ancient courts, banquets became ceremonies of power over life and death. In the Aztec Empire, select rituals culminated in the sacrifice of humans whose bodies were sometimes symbolically consumed, a sacred, horrifying communion between people and gods. Priests would dress the victim as a deity. After the heart was cut from the chest, the flesh, sometimes cooked, might be shared among nobles, priests, and warriors. This wasn't cannibalism in the way we think of it. It was religion, a spiritual act of absorbing divine power, and it was believed to be righteous. Still, imagine sitting at such a table, the silence, the eyes, the understanding. In China's Tang Dynasty, one emperor reportedly died not by sword or illness, but from overeating lychees. Obsessed with the fruit, he demanded it be imported daily, packed in ice across great distances. One evening, he consumed so many that his body collapsed under the weight of it. A more tragic tale comes from the ancient Indian king Nanda, whose court reportedly hosted banquets for hundreds each night. Eventually, enemies poisoned his meals, knowing that in a feast without end, the king would never suspect the dish that killed him. What unites these stories is not just extravagance, but ritualistic obsession. In every culture, the royal table became a sacred place, a performance of divine power, luxury, and appetite. But as you'll see, the line between divine and monstrous is thin. A king who never hungers is a god, but a king who never stops eating becomes something else entirely. Many ancient people believed that feasting was a kind of magic, that to consume the earth's bounty without consequence made you closer to the gods. But what they forgot or refused to see was that all magic demands a price, and for many rulers, the price was their body. Today we speak of power hunger and consuming greed as metaphors. But once, these were literal truths. Kings truly did gorge themselves to death, some on food, some on fear, some on power. And when their feasting ended, the silence left behind was deafening. So if you ever walk through the ruins of a forgotten palace and find a long stone table still intact, ask yourself, what was served here? Who sat here? And what price was paid beneath the silver platters? Some banquets never truly ended, they just grew quiet. Chapter 3. Whispers in Clay. The Demon Tablets of Ancient Mesopotamia. Long before ink touched parchment, before alphabets and scrolls, there was clay, soft, wet, and malleable, the earth itself, shaped by hand. In ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, people pressed symbols into clay tablets with reeds, recording everything from crops and taxes to kings and gods. But some tablets were never meant to be read aloud, they were meant to bind. Tucked between the dusty shelves of ruined libraries, buried beneath doorways, or hidden in grave walls, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of tablets, etched not with history, but with spells, curses, exorcisms, protective charms. And among the most chilling are those designed to trap demons. These are known as incantation tablets. And though they may look like ordinary chunks of clay, the words carved into them hold dark power. One tablet from ancient Babylon reads, "I bind you, evil spirit, you who walk in shadow. I seal you beneath this house. Let your tongue be cut. Let your breath be stone." Another describes a curse upon an enemy. "May you see but not sleep. May your limbs twist in the night. May fire take your food and salt your drink." These weren't poems. These were tools, weapons used in the spiritual battles of everyday life. Because to the people of ancient Mesopotamia, the world was alive with invisible forces, sickness, madness, infertility. These were not caused by chance, but by spirits, curses, or the wandering dead. So if a child cried every night, or a man wasted away despite food and rest, families would consult priests or magicians, called a shapu, to identify the demon at fault. Then they'd write spells to trap or banish it, and sometimes they'd carve those spells into bowls. These eerie objects are known as incantation bowls, and they might be the strangest artifacts in ancient history. Simple ceramic vessels, sometimes placed upside down and buried under a home's threshold. They were inscribed with spiral spells, words winding from the rim inward, designed to confuse and ensnare malevolent beings. Inside, they often drew crude sketches of the demon bound with ropes or pierced with spears. Some even included bits of hair or fingernails, believed to tie the magic to a specific person. One famous bowl reads, "This is the snare for the Lilith, the screamer who enters through dreams. Bound she is beneath this place, she may not rise." Lilith, a spirit blamed for infant death and miscarriage, appears often. Other demons were named for diseases, for madness, for nightmares. The bowls were placed strategically, under beds, under doorways, in corners where shadows lingered. The logic was simple: trap the demon as it entered and bury it in place. But the most disturbing thing? Many of these spells were personal. Not general protections, but specific curses, targeting neighbors, rivals, even family members. Some tablets list names. May Ninsa to be haunted until she begs for forgiveness. Others are more cryptic, describing unnamed enemies whose skin should rot, whose dreams should burn, whose children should vanish. These weren't prayers. They were weapons. And it worked both ways. It's just as people paid scribes to curse others, they paid priests to break curses cast upon them. A hidden war of spells played out in silence, beneath homes and walls and gardens, a world of whispered vengeance, sealed in clay. And here's the strangest part. Some of these spells still haven't been fully translated. Thousands of incantation texts remain in archives and private collections, written in dead languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, waiting for scholars to decode them. A few contain unknown symbols, hybrid scripts or symbols used nowhere else. Some include gibberish, on purpose.
Magic.
They believed didn't have to make sense to the human mind, just had to confuse the spirits. A few texts even include warnings to the reader. If you read these words aloud without offering salt and oil, may the curse turn back on you. Some scholars refuse to read certain tablets aloud at all. You might be wondering, did people truly believe this worked? The answer is yes. Deeply. To the people of Mesopotamia, demons were as real as dust or fire. They had names, purposes, weaknesses. One demon might cause nosebleeds. Another might steal your voice. Third might possess livestock and spoil your harvest. And just like humans, these spirits could be bargained with, tricked, trapped, or destroyed. But not always permanently, because spells fade. Clay cracks. The bindings weaken. There's an eerie theory whispered among museum staff and scholars that when these ancient tablets are unearthed, sometimes strange things happen. Rooms grow cold, lights flicker. One curator swore that after opening a sealed incantation bowl for study, he had vivid nightmares for weeks, always of the same face. Another archaeologist stopped working with demon tablets entirely, citing unexplainable illness and voices at night. She refused to be recorded. These could be stories, coincidence, or just the weight of ancient belief pressing into modern minds. But still, the bowls remain sealed in vaults. The tablets rest in glass cases, and many remain unread. Maybe it's just ancient fear. Or maybe, like the clay says, the demon still listens. So next time you see an old piece of pottery or a cracked tablet in a museum, look closer. It may not be a diary or a ledger or a poem. It may be something older, something darker, a whisper carved in clay, waiting. Chapter 4. The Mummies That Shouldn't Exist. High in the desolate expanse of western China lies one of the driest places on earth, the Taklamakan Desert. A name that roughly translates to go in, and you won't come out. A sea of endless sand, carved by cruel wind and scorched by the sun. For centuries, this place was thought to be empty, a wasteland between empires, dotted only with bones and forgotten trails. But beneath the dunes, something waited. They weren't ruins, not cities, not even temples. They were bodies. They were perfectly preserved. In the late 20th century, a series of archaeological expeditions in the Tarim Basin unearthed burial sites unlike anything researchers had ever seen. From shallow desert tombs, they pulled body after body, curled in repose, still dressed in fine woolen clothing, with skin, hair, and even eyelashes shockingly intact. The air was so dry, the sand so salty, that the dead had mummified naturally, without chemicals or ceremony. But what truly stunned the researchers was what these people looked like. Blonde hair, tall frames, long noses, deep-set eyes. Their features were strikingly European, and they were buried here in the heart of China, more than 4,000 years ago. One of the first mummies discovered was a woman. She lay wrapped in a red wool cloak, feathered with soft fur. Her face was peaceful, almost sleeping, framed by delicate braids of chestnut blonde hair. Her lips were slightly parted. Even her eyelashes were visible. They named her the Beauty of Lulan, and she had been dead for over 3 millennia. Another was a baby, no more than a year old, with a felt bonnet still on its head, buried with care with beads and toys. The child's features were fine and narrow. Its clothes were expertly stitched, using techniques more common in Bronze Age Europe than anywhere in Asia. And then came the Churchin man, tall and broad, with thick auburn hair and patterned leggings. His burial was complex, deliberate, as if he were a noble or priest. Yet no one knew his people, his language, his name. The discovery sent a ripple through the world of archaeology. What were people with Indo-European features doing here, in the middle of a desert so remote that even Chinese emperors struggled to control it? The first theory? Migration. Some experts suggested these were early travelers from the West, perhaps from what is now Eastern Europe or southern Russia, who had moved east thousands of years ago. They may have followed ancient trade routes long before the Silk Road ever existed. Over time, they settled, farmed, and died in this alien land. But others disagreed, because the graves didn't feel foreign, it felt rooted. Whoever these people were, they had lived here for generations. Their burial sites were organized, their textiles sophisticated, their tools well-developed. They weren't wanderers, they were something else, a culture lost in time. To make things even stranger, their language is only faintly preserved. In the centuries after their disappearance, records describe a people called the Takarians, who lived in the region and spoke an Indo-European tongue, similar, incredibly, to the ancient Celtic and Germanic languages of the West. Their writings were found in Buddhist temples, carved into wood, written on leaves. But by the 9th century CE, they were gone. Entirely, their culture erased, their language extinct. Their memory buried beneath empire and sand. All that remained were the bodies. For years, the Chinese government kept tight control over the Tarim mummies. They feared that publicizing the discovery might ignite ethnic tensions, as modern Uyghur groups, native to Xinjiang, claimed possible ancestral ties to the mummies. Others in the West seized on the finds to push controversial narratives about white origins in Asia. But the truth is likely more complex and far more interesting. DNA tests eventually revealed that these ancient people were part of a genetic mosaic. They had roots in both the West and the East, suggesting a world far more connected than we ever imagined. The deserts were not empty. The Silk Road wasn't the beginning of East-West contact. It was a continuation. Long before empires rose, forgotten peoples walked these windswept plains. They traded, they married, they died. And their stories, silent for thousands of years, now speak from beneath the earth. And what makes them so haunting is how human they still look. When you gaze at the face of the Beauty of Lulan, it doesn't feel like looking at a fossil. It feels like staring across time. Her skin is cracked, yes, her body frail. But her expression is calm, almost too calm. And her eyes, still lined by faint lashes, seem like they could open at any moment. Some visitors say they feel watched in the presence of these mummies. Others report dreams, not nightmares, but strange visions, of deserts, of stars over sand, of languages they've never heard. Perhaps it's just imagination. Or perhaps memory lingers longer than we know. Most unsettling of all, we still don't know why they vanished. There's no evidence of invasion, no plague, no war. Their settlements faded. Their language died. Their bones rested in the sand until the wind uncovered them again. And now, centuries later, we are left with faces, but no names. Clothes, but no culture. They are the forgotten dead, perfectly preserved, out of place, and not quite silent. Chapter 5. The Island Where No One Slept. Far out in the blue shimmer of the Aegean Sea lies a small island, barely more than a rocky outcrop dusted with sun-bleached ruins and silence. It has no trees, no towns, no permanent population. Even in ancient times, people only came here briefly and never stayed long. This is Delos. To the Greeks, it was one of the holiest places in the world, the very birthplace of the god Apollo, lord of light, music, and prophecy. But despite its divine origins, Delos was not a place of joy. It was a place of rules, of restrictions, of ritual sterility so extreme it bordered on madness. Because on Delos, you were not allowed to be born. You were not allowed to die. According to legend, Delos was once a drifting rock, a cursed island, tossed by the waves, unwanted by gods and men. Then, when the goddess Leto became pregnant with twins, Apollo and Artemis, she was hunted by Hera, the jealous wife of Zeus. No land dared shelter her. At last, the gods anchored Delos in place and made it sacred. Here, she gave birth in pain and silence, clutching a palm tree for support. And from that moment on, the island was holy ground. Not just a birthplace of gods, but a place forever altered by divine presence. But where gods are born, death is forbidden. The laws that followed were severe and real. In classical Athens, strict religious decrees were issued to keep Delos ritually pure. Every corpse on the island, no matter how old, was to be exhumed and relocated. Not a single grave was allowed to remain. The bones were dug up carefully, loaded onto boats, and ferried to nearby islands for reburial. Pregnant women were forbidden from giving birth on Delos. If a woman neared her due date, she had to leave the island entirely, even if her life was at risk. The same applied to the elderly and the sick. If you were near death, you had to go. These weren't just traditions. They were enforced by law, by soldiers, by priests, by fear. Delos had become a paradox, a sacred land where the most human experiences, birth and death, were banished. But what does it feel like to live in a place where no one is born, where no one dies? Archaeologists who've walked the empty temples and silent causeways of Delos describe a strange feeling, as if the island is frozen, trapped in an eternal pause. There are ruins of markets, theaters, grand villas, statues, and columns of incredible beauty. Yet there are no cemeteries, no tombs, no birth records. It's as if the island held breath for centuries, never exhaled. At the height of its power, Delos became a massive religious center, drawing pilgrims from across the Greek world. Hundreds of festivals were held here in Apollo's honor. Sacred dances, choral contests, sacrifices, and yet behind the music and incense was always that eerie stillness, because no child cried here, no funeral song was sung. The philosopher Plutarch once remarked that Delos was a place untouched by the corruption of decay. He meant it as a compliment, but others found it unnerving. In private writings, a few ancient travelers described Delos as chill or unwelcoming. One poem, never attributed, describes walking the shoreline at dusk and feeling watched by something buried under the sea. Perhaps they sensed the truth, that purity pushed too far becomes a kind of death. Eventually, history caught up with Delos when the Romans took over in the 2nd century BCE. They transformed the island into a free port, a bustling trade hub where slaves were bought and sold by the thousands. The holiness faded, the temples grew quiet, the rules were bent, then broken. And then, without warning, Delos was destroyed. In 88 BCE, during a regional war, the island was raided and burned. Thousands were killed. The market was gutted. The sacred groves were cut down. For an island where death had once been banned, it was a bloodbath beyond imagination. Afterward, Delos was abandoned. The rituals never resumed. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't sacred. It was empty. Today, Delos is uninhabited. No one lives there. No one is buried there. It remains a protected site, a ghostly museum of white ruins and salt wind. Tourists arrive by boat, walk its sunlit paths, and leave by evening. No one stays overnight. Some say the law still holds. that even today no one is allowed to be born or to die on Delos. Others say it's just superstition, a leftover thread of ancient fear. But if you stand alone on the island in the quiet just before dusk, you may start to understand. The air feels too still, the stones too watchful. The silence, that aching, deliberate silence, settles over everything like a blanket. Not peaceful, just expectant, as if the island is waiting for something to return or something to be buried. So when you next look at a map of Greece and see that little speck in the Aegean Sea, remember, it isn't just a ruin. It's a place where humanity was once put on pause, where the gods demanded cleanliness so pure it turned sacred ground into a cold altar, and where no one, not even the gods themselves, could escape the silence forever.